Mariupol greets the new year, 2022, in a relaxed mood, when a strong gust of wind blows over the city Christmas tree, sending its vast illuminated branches crashing to the ground. A few suspicious types whisper that it could be a bad omen for the year ahead, but most people pay little heed to the crescendo of chatter about Vladimir Putin's nefarious plans for Ukraine. They're used to the idea of war here. After the events of 2014, when Russian proxies seized neighbouring Donetsk and briefly controlled Mariupol too, the front line, just outside the city, has hardly moved for years. Occasional military skirmishes are a fact of life, but the idea of a full-scale invasion seems fanciful. So for the first 7 weeks of the year, life goes on, more or less, as normal. People huddle in cafes, smoking shisha on cold evenings. Teenagers giggle as they slip on the ice rink behind the drama theatre. At a nearby restaurant on Saturday night, a group of women dance to a vocalist singing in Russian and English. Their husbands remain seated, nursing beers. A few people do become uneasy and clean out their basements, equipping them as bomb shelters. They stock up on tinned foods. Often, their friends tease them for such eccentric behaviour. And then, in the early hours of the 24th of February, it begins.
Народные республики Донбасса обратились к России с просьбой о помощи. Мною принято решение о проведении специальной военной операции. Ее цель – защита людей, которые на протяжении 8 лет подвергаются издевательствам, геноциду со стороны киевского режима. И для этого мы будем стремиться к демилитаризации и денацификации Украины, а также преданию суду тех, кто совершил многочисленные кровавые преступления против мирных жителей, в том числе и граждан Российской Федерации.
Overnight in the capital of Ukraine, the sound of missile strikes and air sirens. Explosions rocking several cities, including the capital of Kyiv, targeting military installations, including air bases housing fighter jets.
The initial strikes that we think we're hearing right now, right out of the Russian playbook, would be cruise missiles to take out things like surface-to-air missile systems, air defense systems that the Ukrainians would have. That would clear the path for waves of bombers and attack aircraft to continue to hit things like power plants, command and control, internet command centers.
Around 5 a.m, calls go out to the chiefs of police and other municipal services, announcing that military hostilities have begun and ordering them into their offices. Most of them are already awake, roused by the sound of Russian artillery. At 11 in the morning, the mayor, Vadim Boyachenko, convenes a press conference. Already, 3 civilians are dead and 6 injured, he says. The mood in the room is tense. But Boychenko assures the few journalists present that the officials and key infrastructure workers are still working and life will carry on. Don't panic. We are ready to fight for Mariupol and Ukraine, says the mayor. He and most of his team will flee the city 3 days later. Russia had some 25,000 men, consisting of the 5th DPR Brigade, 9th DPR Marine Regiment, the 8th Combined Arms consisting of the 150th Motor Rifle Division, 102nd Infantry Regiment, the 68th Tank Regiment, along with the 291st Artillery Regiment, 83rd Guards Air Assault Brigade, the 155th and 810th Naval Infantry Brigades, the 22nd and the 346th GRU Special Forces Brigades, the FSB Special Units and the Akhmat Battalion, putting Russia at a huge manpower and firepower advantage over the Ukrainian defenders. At the start of the battle, Ukraine had 4,500 to 5,000 troops defending the whole of Mariupol. Other sources claim that Ukraine had 8,000 soldiers in this sector. Control of Mariupol strategically would give Russia a land bridge to Crimea and full control of the Sea of Azov, cutting off Ukraine's maritime trade. It would also deliver a huge propaganda coup for Vladimir Putin. However, the process of capturing the city was slow and immensely bloody. Just days after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Mariupol, a port city of some 430,000 people, found itself surrounded. From the start of Russia's invasion on 24th of February, Mariupol had come under relentless shelling. By the 2nd of March, Russian troops were several kilometres from the city on all sides, An ancient tactical warfare, sieges, were now a consistent feature of this 21st century conflict. By this point, the Russian military had also surrounded the country's second largest city, Kharkiv, and the city of Kherson. And in the weeks ahead, the invading forces would encircle Mariupol ever closer. On the first day, the Russian ground assault from the east was largely repelled, apart from some units from the 36th Brigade, which retreated due to the shelling. They also lost some armoured vehicles and tanks in this process. This retreat left a wedge in Ukraine's defence. On those first few days, the fighting is limited to the outskirts of the city. Wounded soldiers arrive at hospitals from the front, and hundreds of volunteers show up to donate blood. There are long queues at ATMs and petrol stations, but public transport is still running, and some people stoically continue as if everything is normal, heading for work. At the train station, a young couple hurries along the platform, dragging suitcases and cradling a cat. Tearful parents bundle their children onto evacuation trains heading for Kyiv, but the trains leave half empty. By the time most people realise what is coming, it will be too late to leave.
Mariupol was an early target of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The assault in the opening weeks was relentless and deadly.
Ты каждый день засыпаешь с мыслью, хоть бы это все был сон, а просыпаешься с сознанием того, что это реальность.
The port city on the Sea of Azov was a symbolic and strategic prize for Russia. The siege lasted 86 days. Attacks on the maternity hospital and the drama theater, with hundreds of people inside, exposed Russia's disregard for civilians and the laws of war. The last Ukrainian fighters in Mariupol surrendered in May, but the Russians are still waging a campaign on the city, this time to wipe out all traces of its Ukrainian identity.
The city is well defended from the east, where everyone expected the Russians to launch an attack. But there has been no preparation for an invasion from the west. Russian troops pour across the narrow isthmus from Crimea towards Mariupol, and within a few days, the city is encircled. Almost immediately, the Russians hit the electricity, water, and gas supplies. People melt snow for water and cook outside over open flames. Phone reception disappears, creating an information vacuum. The last shops close their doors, soon to be looted by people desperate for food.
Прикрывай, блядь! Стреляй!
As the fighting becomes more intense, people drag mattresses into the stairwells of their apartment blocks or move into their dark and freezing basements. Some people are too old or too frail to move. Most of them will not survive. At hospital number 1 on the eastern side of the city, Serhei Mudry, a traumatologist, arrives for a 2-day shift on the 28th of February. It is too dangerous to move around the city, so Mudry sleeps at the hospital. His shift will end up lasting 40 days. He leaves only once, to collect his family and bring them back to the hospital, giving them beds in an empty ward. Most of the other doctors flee, and soon there is just a skeleton team remaining at the hospital. Mudry, 2 surgeons, an anaesthesiologist, and a couple of nurses. Arrivals are frequent, both soldiers and civilians. Before long, The ambulances stop running and patients arrive in private cars, driven by relatives frantic with worry.
Потому что остальные больницы разбомбили. Сейчас и никто не забирает. МЧС нет, никого нет. Родственники, я не знаю, куда мы их девать будем, как хоронить. В общем, могил без понятия даже.
Да посмотрите, вот лежат дети накрытые, чтобы стекла, потому что там мы были, здание разрушилось, и все полетело на нас, мы оттуда детей выносили просто. Смотрите, вот эта аппаратура перестанет работать, и все.
Помогите! Это город жилой, жилые дома, СОС! Помогите Мариуполю! Убивают детей, женщин, больницы переполнены. Мы все здесь на что? Это ж я не могу понять, это геноцид?
It takes a lot to shock a traumatologist with 2 decades of experience, but the minced flesh and crushed bodies Mudri is seeing every day turn his stomach. The doctors do not have time for the complicated operations required to save limbs. Post-operation wounds require lots of care. There is a huge risk of infection, gangrene, and then dying from it, Mudri explains to patients. Now, whenever there is a serious injury, the doctors amputate. The patient will lose an arm or a leg, but have more chance of staying alive. As the fighting shifts into the suburbs and more buildings come under fire, many people who live close to the hospital arrive and move into the hospital basements. One 92-year-old woman tells Mudri she has come because she remembers hiding in the same place in World War II.
Бабай там лежит, какие назад.
Это женщина! Не стрелять.
Она уже 200. Ребенок. Ребенок?
Давай, выходи! Выходи! Стреляй! Быстро под бордюр ложите! Под бордюр бегите! Под бордюр туда бегите!
Направо!
Быстрее! Быстрее! Ложитесь! Ложитесь!
Ну, кто там качается в машине?
Дети целые! Мы не можем выйти! Идите!
Вы в машине видишь? Слепой кто-то.
It was a sight that shocked the world. A maternity and children's hospital hit by a Russian airstrike. The hope that hospitals would be spared the worst of the war turned out to be a naive one. Soon after the strike in the Turkish resort town, the Russian and Ukrainian foreign ministers met. It was the highest level discussion since the war had begun. The two men discussed Mariupol more than anything else. Russia's Sergei Lavrov looked his Ukrainian counterpart, Dmytro Kuleba, in the eye and told him the maternity ward was filled with Ukrainian fighters, not pregnant women. Unfortunately, I can confirm that the Russian leadership, including Minister Lavrov, live in their own reality, says Kuleba. Talks broke up after 90 minutes, with no agreement on anything. The doctors use tiny makeshift oil lamps to provide weak light when the day is over. Mudry is reminded of the memoirs of Nikolai Pigorov, the celebrated Russian physician who performed field surgery during the Crimean War. In the space of a month, he has moved from the 21st century to the 19th. The small team is forced to perform operations for which they have no experience. A heavily pregnant woman arrives wounded, and they amputate a leg. She survives, but miscarries. Many people cannot be saved, and the morgue is soon overflowing. Explosions shatter most of the hospital windows. Mudry and his family pull their mattresses into the corridor to sleep more safely. One day in late March, the Romanian anesthesiologist, Alexander Zhuk, attempts a short drive outside the hospital to return a patient to another shelter. But on the return journey, his car is shot up and he is hit multiple times. He makes it back, but only just. His car slamming into the hospital building, with Zhuk slumped over the wheel and losing blood fast. Before losing consciousness, Zhuk tells the other doctors what sedation to give him and whispers his blood group. Mudry and the surgeons dress the wound and perform a transfusion, in semi-darkness, using the blood of someone in the cellar with a matching group. Somehow, Zhuk pulls through. With every passing day, the fighting gets closer, and the hospital becomes more dangerous. At the end of March, they decide they can no longer use the generator. It is as noisy as a tank, and Mudry fears it could draw attention and lead to the hospital being targeted. They tell 10 remaining patients who require regular kidney dialysis that the machines will not be switched on again. 6 of the 10 struggle out of bed and depart, on foot, towards the front line, hoping they might survive the walk and reach a hospital in Russian-occupied Donetsk in time to receive dialysis. 4 are too weak to move and stay behind in their beds to die. By early April, the area of the hospital is the scene of close-quarter street fighting. For 3 days, Mudry and the other doctors are confined to the cellar, while 40 patients too ill to move are left in beds in the ward. On the 6th of April, Russian soldiers peer into the basement, announcing they now control the territory and there will be an evacuation. When Mudry emerges, the hospital buildings have taken multiple hits. He never finds out whether his patients survived or were burned alive. By the end of the fighting, according to one estimate, 82 out of 106 hospitals and other healthcare facilities in Mariupol were destroyed or damaged. On the 14th of March, a humanitarian corridor was agreed with Russia, and a convoy of at least 160 private cars managed to leave Mariupol. By mid-afternoon on the 15th of March, 2,000 cars had left. But many more had not yet managed to leave, and so the BBC reported that improvised burial sites were now being dug in the city. The deputy mayor was unable to quantify the number of bodies buried in this way, but he told the BBC there were 67 at one site alone. We can't bury the victims in private graves, as those are outside the city and the perimeter is controlled by Russian troops. Some we can't identify, but some had documents. With municipal services having collapsed, street cleaners and road repair teams were collecting bodies in the streets. We've had no electricity or heating, sanitation, water, food for 11 days, Mr. Orlov said. Mariupol was not alone. There were reports of mass graves too in the town of Bucha and the city of Chernihiv, both in the north of Ukraine. Later, a US satellite firm said it had identified a mass burial site containing about 200 graves near a village called Manush, about 20 kilometers, 12 miles west of Mariupol. For Ukrainians, all this evoked memories of World War II, when Jews and Soviet partisans were murdered by Nazis, and the Holodomor in the early 1930s, after Stalin forced Ukrainian peasants into collective farms and seized all of their grain and livestock. For days, the Donetsk Regional Theatre of Drama had been a place of safety for civilians sheltering from Russia's aerial assault. Then came an attack that, according to officials, killed 300 people, thought to be the worst known loss of life in a single strike since the invasion began. The vast Soviet-era building in the middle of the square in the city centre had been clearly marked as a civilian shelter. According to an advisor to the mayor, some 600 people had been inside when it was hit. The BBC spoke to survivors who told of mothers searching for their children under the rubble and a 5-year-old child screaming, "I don't want to die."
8-year-old Lera lost both her parents and 2-year-old sister when Russia bombed the Mariupol drama theater 2 years ago today.
I called for my sister, Karolina. They burned alive there.
It was a symbol of Mariupol. Russia turned it into a graveyard. The place had sheltered over 1,000 adults, kids, and pets. They painted the word children outside in giant letters for protection. It didn't stop the Russian army. The bomb landed directly on the stage of the theater.
The airstrike came right in the middle of the theater.
Survivors' accounts of the bombing, recreated by Ukrainian researchers, paint a picture of despair.
There were no humanitarian corridor. Russians don't let people out. Shells were falling behind our backs.
Terror.
The sounds of an airplane were heard.
A blast happened in a moment.
Pain.
Their heads were bleeding.
I saw a hand and a head in the heap of rubble. The person pleaded for help,
disputing Russia's claims the Ukrainian troops were there.
I was there. I saw it. There were no soldiers inside.
Today the site is hidden behind a fabric fence. Russia hurriedly removed the ruins, calling it renovation. Even the word children is gone. Just like Lera's sister and others, as if they never existed. But Mariupol won't forget. Ukraine won't forget.
Russia denied it had any involvement in attacking the theatre, but there was widespread international condemnation of Moscow's actions. Russian Colonel General Mikhail Mizhnitsev, who the British government described as the butcher of Mariupol for his role in the bombardment of the city, was later sanctioned by the UK government.
The streets and roads of Mariupol are fraught with danger. Here, at this intersection, a sniper's bullets whizzed by meters from us, and then again. This is the eastern side of Mariupol city, the site of vicious battles just days ago. These are Chechen fighters. Their commander Talib has let us go closer to the front lines, barely 500 or so meters. That way, west of us, are Ukrainian military positions, but of course predominantly nationalist battalions such as Azov. The fighting here was absolutely ferocious, as you can perhaps tell. A tank round yesterday impacted that building over there. But again, everywhere here are bodies of Ukrainian fighters, nationalists, which haven't been yet removed. Devastated neighborhoods, shops, apartment buildings, offices and houses stretch for miles. No structure here was spared in the fighting. In the midst of the rubble are countless bodies of Ukrainian nationalists, surrounded by bullet casings and shrapnel. This is, unfortunately, this is as far as we go. This is right on the edge of the front line. Behind this wall Everything's covered by Ukrainian snipers from Azovstal, the factory that spans a huge area of the city. That is where Ukrainian forces and snipers are still concentrated. We have had enough of snipers for the day. So basically just the edge of this building is it. In the other direction, the Chechen fighters have been kind enough to escort us to. Allahu Akbar. This building, for example, liberated just yesterday. There was a lot of people, many people, pensioners, women, children, hiding in the basement. Unfortunately, access to the building, to the basement, is on the other side of this building. That ruined structure in the distance is the last of what is controlled by Russian forces, by Chechen fighters here. Unfortunately, the road between this building and that building is also covered by Ukrainian snipers. A Russian fighter earlier today was killed while attempting to cross. They still haven't been able to get the body out. The fighters here know what urban combat is. Few things in our world are worse than this.
We're moving ahead without losses. We're working very efficiently. The civilians that we liberate, they kiss us, they rejoice, they say thank you. There are elderly men, women. We evacuate people every day and give them food.
And here's a little example of how the Russians liberated and evacuated Mariupol civilians, as the Chechen twat just said there. Blasting the building with a tank until the civilians flee, and then putting them in an armoured vehicle and driving them away. This is how liberation was conducted in Mariupol. Look at the liberation unfold. Saved by the evil Nazi Ukrainian regime. Saved by a tank blowing away your fucking house. God knows how any civilians walked out of there. Or God knows what their fate was after this.
Слава Україні! Героям слава! Це звернення до маріупольців, до захисників Маріуполя, до всього світу. Маріуполь – це місто, яке не скорилося Росії в 2014 році, яке 8 років було символом українського Донбасу, світлого, прекрасного українського Донбасу на противагу російському Мордору. Зараз за це Маріуполь знищують. Захисники Маріуполя б'ються не на межі, а за межею людських можливостей. Азовці, морські піхотинці, Національна гвардія України, багато інших підрозділів творять чудеса. Фактично 3000 бійців прикували зараз до себе 14-тисячне російське угрупування. Вони скували своїми діями більше 10% всіх окупаційних сил Росії. в Україні. Це справжні герої на рівні 300 спартанців або козаків, які прикривали козацьку армію в битві під Берестечком. Але зараз місто знищується. Воно вже не на межі, а за межею гуманітарної катастрофи. Росіяни не мають ані уяв про людяність, ані розуміння, що таке правила ведення війни. Знищуються школи, знищуються лікарні, знищуються дитячі садочки. Діти гинуть через нестачу води в місті. Маріуполю зараз не потрібні бадьорі брифінги або оптимістичні картинки в Фейсбуці та Інстаграмі. Маріуполю потрібна деблокада. Треба спасти українських героїв. Треба спасти українське місто. Треба деблокувати Маріуполь. Кожен день до мене звертаються, я не знаю, сотні і сотні друзів з абсолютно різних бойових підрозділів. Всі говорять одне і те ж саме. І я передаю це своїм братам-азовцям, кожному захиснику Маріуполя. Кожен день, виходячи на бойову роботу, ми думаємо про вас, ми рівняємось на вас. Ми працюємо по ворогу заради вас. Вся армія готова йти на деблокаду. Чекаємо наказу. Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
Уничтожил! Azov, сука!
On the 19th of March, claims of forced deportations. The allegation that Russia had been forcibly relocating hundreds of civilians from Mariupol. On March the 24th, Mariupol authorities updated the figure to 15,000. By the 27th of March, Russia was housing an estimated 5,000 at a temporary camp in Bezimene, east of Mariupol, seen in satellite images. In parts of Mariupol now under Russian control, reports suggested that civilians without access to food, water and medicine had little choice but to leave for Russian-controlled areas and Russia itself. Some Ukrainian officials described Russia's actions as deportations to so-called filtration camps. A warring party deporting civilians to its territory is an internationally recognised abuse of human rights. Over time, accounts emerged of conditions inside these facilities. One couple described how they were driven to a refugee hub that was like a true concentration camp, in which their phones were searched and elderly people slept in corridors without mattresses or blankets. The office of Mayor Boychenko, who had by this point left the city, estimated that nearly 5,000 people had been killed in Mariupol since the start of the siege. It also said 90% of buildings had been damaged and 40% destroyed. The estimated number of people who were thought still to be trapped numbered at around 170,000.
وين شباب؟
Отходим!
Вообще из здания отходим обратно на этой позиции. Очередной. Сюда. Подходишь, стой, смотри. Смотришь?
Рот открывай, главное, рот.
Подъезд видишь, выглядит. Подъезд видишь?
Второй.
Да. Увидел? Да. Вот подъезд. Да. Вот окна белые. Верхние? Да. По ним сопоставь пятерку с нолик, дырочкой. Вот это было меня аж. Вот это слева. Смотри, видимо. У меня там семья на ладони. Там по-любому газ.
Ну что-то там гремело. Смотри, вот эти окна, там гремело. Ходил кто-то. Вот в этом доме, в окнах гремело, как будто кто-то ходил.
Это горит, наверное.
Ну, понятное дело, но мониторить-то надо.
Рома, ты так не стой, ты вышел, закинул туда. Откуда прилетает по ним?
Наши, видимо, там внутри.
22-й, кто стреляет? Работали мы! В кого?
Да я вот подглядел.
Отзывайтесь, пацаны.
Да. Отходи с пролета. Там свои сейчас два. Снизу свои все.
Федор! Пошел.
Пошел.
За улицей Пашковского, где засели ВСУшники, подстрелили двух солдат, но, в общем, когда их подстрелили, они продолжали двигаться. То есть в каждого, наверное, по 10 попаданий и продолжали двигаться. Это говорит о том, что, вероятнее всего, они под какими-то наркотиками, судя по форме. Ну, это могут быть и азовцы, и морпехи, ВСУ. А вон то здание сейчас для нас угроза. Там засели снайпера, пулеметчики и расчеты РПГ. Волгами во двор накидывай, брат! Дальше протащите, по ногам может достать! Где валяется брошенный джавелин, готовый к пуску. Расчет, скорее всего, погиб, либо просто в бегство пошел.
By late March, weeks of relentless Russian shelling had reduced Mariupol to ruins. But attempts to establish a ceasefire in the city to allow evacuations had collapsed, amid accusations of bad faith on both sides of the conflict. Ukraine claimed that Russian troops had carried out shelling on the evacuation routes. Russia was then accused by Ukraine of blocking a bus convoy on its way to evacuate Mariupol. Meanwhile, French officials said Vladimir Putin had agreed to consider plans to evacuate civilians from the city during an hour-long phone call with France's President Emmanuel Macron. But the Kremlin said the Russian leader had insisted that shelling of the city would only cease when Ukraine had surrendered. On the 13th of April, Russia's defense ministry said 1,026 soldiers of Ukraine's 36th Marine Brigade, including 162 officers, had surrendered in Mariupol. 2 days later, the mayor told the Associated Press that an estimated 120,000 people still remained in the city. With the Russians closing in on the centre of Mariupol from all sides, in the middle of April, the army leadership orders all remaining units of Ukrainian troops defending the city to regroup at Azovstal, the vast steel plant that dominates the Mariupol skyline. Azovstal, constructed in 1933, is a city inside a city, a sprawling industrial park with dozens of cavernous steel hangars. Underground, there is a network of basements, some of which were fitted out as shelters after the 2014 conflict. The plant serves as the makeshift headquarters of the Azov Regiment, a Ukrainian National Guard unit that has grown out of a volunteer force, which first defended the city in 2014. Azov are now leading the defence of Mariupol. Other units fight their way through to the plant. Svatoslav Yemenov, a former cop who signed up in March, arrives in a convoy from the port area that comes under heavy fire en route. About a third of them are killed on the way. Another group claims to have made it through by dubbing their vehicles with Russian Z symbols and speeding through enemy lines. The Azov commanders assign Yemenov and his men a position on the factory perimeter. They work in shifts, resting in the basements when back from their defensive positions. 2 of the basements are packed with civilians, plant employees and their families, whom the factory director invited to take refuge when the hostilities started. Not expecting that the Ukrainian military would also see the Warren of Tunnels as the perfect place for a last stand against the Russians. Conditions steadily worsen in all the basements. Some areas are so dusty and dirty that the soldiers find their clothes and exposed skin are quickly covered in a thick layer of grime. Food is now rationed to 1 meal a day. On their brief breaks, Yemenov and his team hunt for leftover provisions in the bunkers. There is plenty of black tea left by the steel workers, but finding sugar is a rare success and cause for celebration. The Russians fly drones to monitor movements above ground, then send in aviation once they clock a potential position. At first, the planes came in 2s, then in 4s. They dropped bombs on the factory buildings, on the bunkers, Yemenov recalls later. The steel and concrete structures are surprisingly sturdy, and Yemenov's hangar remained structurally sound for 2 weeks, despite heavy bombardment. By the end of April, Azovstal has taken on an epic symbolism for both sides. For the Russians, the retreat from Kyiv in late March has left the Kremlin's initial battle plans in tatters, and Mariupol becomes important as a tangible gain, even if they have to destroy the city to conquer it. For the Ukrainians, the last stand at Azovstal becomes a David and Goliath tale of heroic resistance. The Russians drop huge fab bombs, which smash through the ground and reach the basements. The blast impact throwing one wall against another and crushing those in between. Dmitro, a press officer for the Azov Regiment, wakes one night with a start, thinking he has fallen out of bed. He notices the bunker is much colder than usual. When he stands up, he sees that much of the wall has gone, and he is standing partially in the open air. Putting on a jacket and flip-flops, he turns and sees a fellow soldier lying on the floor covered in blood, sighing his last breaths. 12 people die in the attack. As conditions become ever more unbearable, Ukrainian military intelligence plans a series of daring helicopter missions to bring supplies to the besieged plant. The pilots fly just a few metres from the ground and hope for the best. Not all of them return. The small helicopters can hardly provide adequate resources for the 3,000 people still at the plant, but they do bring one game-changing piece of equipment, Starlink devices that allow the Azovstal defenders to beam out photographs and video each evening. Dmitro's photographs of weak soldiers laid out with gruesome wounds resonate around the world. Azovstal is now at the centre of international attention. The UN Secretary General flies to Moscow to ask Vladimir Putin to open a corridor for the civilians at the plant to leave. Wives of the fighters travel to the Vatican to petition the Pope. Finally, on the 1st of May, the United Nations and the International Committee of the Red Cross facilitate an agreement between the two sides to secure the release of the civilians. A Red Cross team sleeps in a tent encampment outside the city and travels into the city to facilitate the release. One of them knows Mariupol well, having spent time there before the war. She is shocked at the level of destruction she sees on the ride into the city. With a brief ceasefire in place, people slowly begin to emerge from a hole between slabs of collapsed concrete where an airstrike had hit from one of the bunkers. They were physically and mentally distressed. They were so white, they had not seen the sun for weeks, she recalled. With the civilians gone, the Russians discussed storming the plant. Amid rumours of a surrender, many fighters inside discuss whether it might be better to fight to the very end. or embark on a suicidal breakout mission to storm Russian lines. But on the 16th of May, after top-secret negotiations between emissaries of Kyiv and Moscow, Ukraine's General Staff orders the remaining Azovstal fighters to lay down their arms. Over the next 4 days, a total of 2,439 fighters give themselves up to the Russian forces outside the plant, with the Red Cross team overseeing. At 4 p.m. on the 20th of May, the final group of Azovstal defenders, including Yumenov, leave the plant.
More than 260 Ukrainian soldiers have left the Azovstal steelworks in Mariupol after an assault which lasted 82 days. The Russian Ministry of Defense says that this video shows Ukrainian soldiers surrendering at the plant. Sky News has verified the location, and we have blurred the faces of alleged Ukrainian soldiers. This is in line with the Geneva Convention on Prisoners of War.
I'll conclude this here. Unfortunately, I've not got the knowledge or the skill at the minute to be able to sort of do what I want with regards to battle lines, animations of the lines moving, but that will come in time. I hope that you've enjoyed watching this episode. The Death of a Sea, Mariupol. This video is in dedication to all who served and all who fell, defending Mariupol. Slava Ukraini, Herium Slava. After more than 80 days of fighting, the Russians have won the battle for Mariupol.
хорошего понемножку.
Руку Азов, сука!